Mark, a dog owner, took his German Shepherd Kyler out for a peaceful walk by the lake one sunny afternoon. Everything felt normal until Kyler suddenly lunged toward the water with surprising force, yanking Mark along with her. His heart raced as he hit the cold water, gasping for air. But as he struggled to steady himself, he spotted something beneath the surface that made his blood run cold. Hands trembling, he pulled out his phone and called 911, still staring in disbelief at what lay under the water. At first, no one wanted to believe what Mark had seen, not even the police. It all seemed too strange, too unlikely. Mark couldn't blame them. If Kyler hadn't led him there, he wouldn't have believed it either. He never would have found it on his own. But eventually, he managed to convince the officers. When he showed them the proof of what he had discovered, they were floored. They called for backup right away and even brought in a detective team. This was serious. They needed answers, and fast. In the middle of all the chaos, Mark almost forgot about Kyler. She was the one who started all this. The dog had done something amazing, and they could never thank her enough. But still, one big question remained. What made Kyler rush to the lake in the first place? What had Mark found in the water? And why did it lead to an emergency call? Mark had raised Kyler since she was a pup. They'd been together for almost 5 years, and she'd always been a well-behaved, loyal dog. Mark felt confident with her in any situation, which is why her behavior that day threw him off so much. They were headed to a park they'd visited plenty of times before, one of Kyler's favorite spots, but it had been a while since their last visit. Lately, Mark's schedule had been tight. The moment Kyler realized where they were going, she got super excited. It always made Mark smile to see her like that, but it also meant he might have his hands full. When she got this hyped, she tended to pull on the leash, and with her strength, it wasn't always easy to manage. Still, Mark had always been able to handle it. But to his surprise, Kyler was fairly calm when she hopped out of the car. She had her head down right away, sniffing the ground with serious focus. This wasn't unusual for a German Shepherd, and Mark had seen her do this before. But not like this. She was tracking something, and it looked important. He started wondering what had her so locked in. Maybe there were animals nearby? But even if there were, she was usually calm around them. Something about today was different. Curious, Mark gave Kyler a bit more leash than usual and let her lead. She veered off the trail, and he followed, interested to see where she was going. As they got farther from the path, Kyler started pulling harder, her nose still glued to the ground. Mark tightened his grip, just in case she tried to break free. He tied the leash around his wrist, a choice he would soon regret. To Mark's surprise, Kyler's nose led them to a small, hidden pond tucked away in the park. Mark had never noticed it before, and from the looks of it, not many others had either. The ground was covered in untouched leaves, and there wasn't a single piece of trash lying around. Still, something about this place had grabbed Kyler's full attention. She was sniffing like she was onto something and kept circling, clearly trying to pick the scent back up. 10 minutes went by, and Mark started to grow impatient. He was still curious about what Kyler was after, but it was his first real day off in 2 months. He hadn't planned on spending all of it chasing his dog around the park. But then it happened. In a sudden burst of energy, Kyler's ears shot up. She lifted her head sharply and locked her gaze on the pond. Before Mark could react, she bolted straight for the water and leaped in. He didn't see it coming, and because the leash was tied to his wrist, he was yanked right in after her. The shock of the freezing water hit him hard. Mark didn't even have time to make sense of what was happening. Kyler was pulling with so much force that he had no control over his movement, and he struggled just to keep his head above water. The pond was way deeper than he had expected, and his feet couldn't find the bottom. Then things got even worse. All of a sudden, he stopped being dragged across the surface and instead began sinking. He hadn't taken a breath, and now he was underwater, running out of air. Panic set in fast. Everything was spinning, and it felt like time slowed down. Mark knew he had to act fast if he wanted to survive. Somehow, through the fear, he had a brief moment of clarity. He needed to get the leash off his wrist. It wasn't easy. He had tied it tightly, and with Kyler still pulling, the knot was getting tighter. Mark was fading fast. He felt the cold sinking into his bones and the lack of oxygen starting to blur his vision, but just before he lost consciousness, he managed to work his hand free. With every ounce of strength he had left, he pushed toward the surface. In that moment, Kyler was the last thing on his mind. All he could think about was getting out alive. When his head finally broke through the surface, he gasped hard for air and started swimming toward the shore. His body felt heavy and weak, and the cold water made it hard to move, but he knew he had to get out, fast. With everything he had left, Mark managed to reach the shore. He collapsed onto the ground, soaking wet and breathless, dropping to his hands and knees as he tried to catch his breath and pull himself together. He still couldn't fully process what had just happened. It had all gone by so fast. But then a terrifying thought hit him. Where was Kyler? Mark spun around toward the lake, eyes scanning every inch of the surface. The last thing he remembered, Kyler had dived in, which had nearly caused him to drown. But she couldn't stay underwater forever. As hard as he looked, he couldn't see any sign of her. No movement, no air bubbles. Nothing. His mind raced. Had Kyler already gotten out of the water without him seeing? But he hadn't been on shore that long. If she had made it out, there should be some trace of her, wet paw prints, movement in the bushes. But there was nothing. It was like she had vanished into thin air. Or worse, maybe she hadn't gotten out at all. Gripping the soggy edge of the pond, Mark's thoughts spiraled. How could I have been so careless, he thought, his voice trembling as he whispered the words. Every memory of raising, training, and loving Kyler flashed through his mind, now shadowed by a growing sense of regret. A darker thought crept in. If she had drowned, wouldn't her body have floated up by now? Maybe she was stuck under something. The idea made his chest tighten. What if she's trapped? He muttered, dread creeping through him. With shaking hands, Mark fumbled for his phone. He scrolled through his contacts, calling one number after another, his voice breaking as he told people what had happened. Please come, he pleaded, desperate for someone, anyone, to help or at least stand by him through this. Soon, cars began arriving at the park entrance. Doors opened and slammed shut. Friends, family, even distant acquaintances came running toward him, their faces tense and full of worry. A group quickly formed, united by one goal, to find Kyler. We need to search every inch of this area, Mark said firmly, his tone now steady and focused. Some of you check the water's edge. Others spread out through the park. Anything that helps us find her, people nodded. The tension turned into action. Mark's words sparked a new energy, and everyone prepared to move. He knew the pond better than most. Over the years, he'd spent dozens of weekends exploring around it. If anyone can do this, I can, he told himself, steadying his nerves. He wasn't a trained diver, but he had some basic skills, and he was willing to do whatever it took. Without wasting time, Mark's wife jumped in their car and sped off. She was on the phone with a local diving shop, her voice tight with urgency. Every minute counts, she muttered, pressing harder on the gas. She didn't stop until the gear was secured. Meanwhile, someone came up with an idea to widen the search. Social media. They posted Kyler's photo, the color of her leash, and where she was last seen. Have you seen her? Became the question everyone was asking. Park visitors were approached, more people joining in, sharing the post, spreading the word. As Mark suited up, adjusting his diving mask and checking his oxygen tank, he could hear voices calling out Kyler's name across the park. People had split up like a search team, each taking a section of the area. The park echoed with hope and determination. Hours passed. Every minute felt like a lifetime. One by one, searchers returned to the gathering point, their faces downcast. Mark came up from another dive, exhausted and dizzy, only to hear the words he feared. "We haven't found her." No one's seen Kyler. Bracing himself against the edge of the lake, heart pounding in his ears, Mark took a deep breath. Without hesitating, he plunged back in. The cold water wrapped around him again, but all he could focus on now was finding his dog. Mark scoured the murky depths, searching for any sign of Kyler. Everything around him was washed in dull colors and dim light. Strangely, there weren't any fish or plants in sight, which only made the lake feel even more unsettling. The silence underwater pressed in on him, adding weight to the knot in his stomach. As he swam deeper, he began to realize just how vast and complex the lake really was. It wasn't just a simple pond. It had unexpected depth, with twisting paths and shadowy crevices. His flashlight swept over the rocky bottom, casting long shadows that moved like they were alive. Every dark corner felt like it might hold the answer. He pushed forward, driven by hope, even though his oxygen was running low. He refused to stop. He had to believe he'd find something if he just kept looking. Time stretched on. It felt like hours had passed, but the lake remained oddly empty. There were no footprints, no disturbed silt, no clues at all, not even a ripple out of place. Mark's skin prickled. Something didn't feel right. How could it be this empty? Then, in the beam of his flashlight, something glinted. Metal. Cutting through the thick water, he moved closer and realized he was looking at strange, man-made shapes lying at the bottom. These weren't natural. They'd been placed here deliberately. As he swam nearer, the outlines became clearer. His heart thudded harder in his chest. Large, rectangular objects began to appear out of the gloom. They didn't belong here. One by one, his light revealed row after row of sealed shipping crates. That's when it hit him. This wasn't an accident. These had been hidden here on purpose. The crates looked old but carefully placed, like someone didn't want them found. A heavy feeling settled over Mark. This wasn't just weird, it was dangerous. Whoever had done this had gone to great lengths to keep it secret. He had to tell someone, right now. Breaking through the surface, Mark gasped for air and shouted as loud as he could, "Call the police!" Now. His panic sent a wave of confusion through the crowd on shore. People looked at one another, unsure what to make of it. Holding back tears, his wife grabbed her phone and called 911. "We need officers at the park," she told them urgently. "My husband found something in the lake. Please send help." Her voice shook, but there was no mistaking the seriousness of her words. Without waiting, Mark dove back into the lake. He moved carefully between the crates, the shadows now seeming darker than before. These boxes weren't just junk. There was something more to them, something hidden. Suddenly he heard a sound, a dull thump. He spun around and pointed his light at one crate in particular. Inside, something moved. Mark swam closer and froze. Kyler was there. She was alive, pressed against a clear panel, a small pocket of air keeping her from drowning. Their eyes locked, and in that instant, the panic turned to relief. He acted fast. Mark yanked the crate open and pulled Kyler free. They both broke through the surface together, gasping, coughing, and shaking. Cheers broke out from the shoreline. People ran toward them, shouting, crying, clapping. It was like the whole crowd let out one huge breath. Friends, family, even total strangers rushed in, circling around them in joy and disbelief. The nightmare was over. Kyler was safe. Mark was safe. And in that moment, everyone felt it. Something powerful had just happened. Their bond had only grown stronger, and somehow the entire group felt connected by what they'd just witnessed. And as the cheers settled into soft chatter, quiet whispers began to spread through the crowd. Why were those crates down there? What was inside them? Mark's face showed the same questions racing through everyone's mind. The joy of finding Kyler alive was now layered with something heavier, a deep unease. Suddenly, sirens broke through the calm. Red and blue lights flashed across the lake's surface as police arrived at the scene. Their serious expressions clashed sharply with the relief and excitement from just moments earlier. "We got a report about submerged crates," one officer said, walking over to Mark and Kyler. Still soaked from his dive, Mark held out his waterproof camera. "See for yourselves," he said. The group of officers gathered around to watch the footage. The screen showed eerie, shadowy footage of the lake's bottom, slowly leading up to the crates, and what they held inside. As the final frame faded, a thick silence settled over them. The officers looked at each other, their faces suddenly pale. "These aren't just regular crates," one of them said quietly. "They're full of weapons." The weight of the discovery hit everyone at once. What had started as Kyler's strange curiosity had led to something huge, something dangerous. A peaceful park filled with kids, families, and walkers had been hiding a secret no one would have believed. Around the lake, the quiet hum of police activity grew louder. The place that had once been a calm getaway was now a full-on crime scene. Yellow tape went up, forensic teams moved in, setting up gear and prepping for what was clearly going to be a long investigation. "Over there," Mark pointed, showing the exact spot he'd gone under. He described everything he'd seen, the placement of the crates, the strange layout, and the air pocket that had kept Kyler alive. His detailed account helped the dive teams prepare for what they were about to face. News vans started lining the edge of the park, antennas went up, reporters pushed forward, eager to get the story. Mark and Kyler were suddenly in the spotlight, seen as the brave pair who uncovered something no one else had noticed. Photos were taken, interviews were done, the story spread quickly. Under the old wooden gazebos, police set up temporary posts, calling in locals one by one. Some looked confused, others looked nervous. Officers asked tough questions, hoping someone had seen or heard something that could help explain how those weapons ended up there. People started talking. An older man who fished at the lake said he'd seen boats moving around late at night. A woman who jogged early in the mornings remembered a truck parked near the trail more than once, always at strange hours. At first, the details felt random, but investigators began to notice a pattern. Back at the local precinct, detectives pored over cold case files. The walls were covered in maps, photos, and reports. Slowly, connections started to form. Some of the weapons found in the lake looked like ones linked to unsolved cases in the area. Mentions of an old smuggling route popped up again. The more they dug, the more it looked like the park had been used as a secret drop-off point. But the scale of it all, the amount of weapons, the planning, and the use of such a public space suggested someone powerful was behind it. So the police made a decision. They'd keep public attention focused on Mark and Kyler's rescue, using it as a way to mask the ongoing investigation. Behind the scenes, plainclothes officers stayed nearby, watching, waiting to see if anyone came back for the hidden stash. Meanwhile, undercover agents moved into known criminal circles, trying to trace the source of the weapons. Back in the community, word spread fast. People whispered in grocery store aisles, at schools, at coffee shops. The once quiet town now buzzed with rumors. The mystery of the crates left a lasting impact. Parents held their kids a little closer, and late-night walks around the park became far less common. The once quiet, carefree community now lived under a cloud of tension and unanswered questions. Then, one evening, a junior detective stumbled upon something big, a wiretap recording. The voice was distorted, but clear enough to understand. It spoke of a plan to retrieve the goods. Specific times, dates, and coded names were mentioned. The message was clear. Someone was coming back to the lake. The precinct buzzed with activity. They had a chance to stop whoever was behind this. Under the cover of night, tactical teams surrounded a warehouse that had been under quiet investigation. Radios crackled softly with urgent whispers. Spotlights stayed off. Officers moved in silence. "This suspect is armed and extremely dangerous," came the final warning through the radio. With a silent signal, officers breached the warehouse door. Room by room they swept through, weapons drawn, senses sharp. Inside, they found crates just like the ones from the lake, stacked, sealed, and waiting to be moved. Mark and Kyler were there too, working with the police, pretending to be buyers. When the criminals offered a sample, the officers sprang into action. But the suspects panicked and grabbed Kyler, holding her close as a shield. Mark didn't hesitate. With a sudden, unexpected move, he created just enough of a distraction. The officers took their chance. In seconds, the suspects were on the ground, handcuffed and disarmed. The warehouse, once full of threat, now pulsed with relief. Kyler, though shaken, managed a small smile. It was over. They were safe. A few days later, the entire town gathered in the square. Mark and Kyler stood at the front, surrounded by applause, camera flashes, and a wave of gratitude. The mayor gave a speech. Commendations were handed out. People lined up, some with tears, others with handmade gifts, all to say thank you. That night, as things quieted down, Mark sat beside the same lake where everything had started. Kyler was at his side, leaning gently into him. The water was still again, soft ripples dancing under the moonlight. He stared out across the surface, his thoughts full. What began as a normal walk had turned into something so much bigger. And somehow it had all started with Kyler, just following her instincts. He gave her a gentle pat and whispered, "Good girl." Thanks for joining us on this unbelievable true story of courage, loyalty, and unexpected twists. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with others who'd love it too. We'll see you in the next one.